Yes, so my name is Anne-Marie Petrinka, but people call me Bam because it's too long to say. And this is Sam. So we are part of the North America consulting team, and today we'll be talking about Multi-Linux Manager and using it as a Liberate tool. Maybe we'll start with the question, how many of you are using SUSE Manager, SUSE Multi-Linux Manager currently? All right, and have you used the Liberate formula yet, or no experience with it at all? Nope. All right. Well, this is going to be cool because we'll be doing a demo. All right. In our agenda today, we'll give a brief overview of what is Multi-Linux Manager and what is Multi-Linux Support, and what each of those has the capability of doing. But we're not going to go into too much depth, as there were two previous product sessions about those. I think that happened yesterday, so I'm not sure if you got to attend those, but you can always watch the recording if you didn't. And then we'll talk about using Multi-Linux Manager to migrate to Multi-Linux Support and what that process looks like. And at that point, I think Sam and I decided we're going to probably flip the screens and start our demo because it takes a little while, and then we'll flip back to talk about the procedure and kind of show you what it looks like at the end. And we've both worked on a couple of projects last year that with some real live customer use cases, and so we'll kind of tell you our consulting experience about how that went. And we'll flip back to demos, and you'll see the resulting, baked cake, so to speak, right? All right. So to continue on, we got to the point of describing what is Multi-Linux Manager, what is Multi-Linux Support, what they each cover, and so why should you use one to convert systems to the other, right? Why use Multi-Linux Manager? So it provides us this easy process. As you've seen, there's kind of two ways to do it, right? One is while you're onboarding brand new systems, you have the ability to create an activation key. You attach this Liberate formula to it, and you just say, as soon as I onboard, start the process of this small migration, right? I would say it takes about 10 minutes, right? And so you can onboard. I worked with a customer last year. We'll talk about that in a bit, but basically you could just onboard your system and convert them in one process, or you can have already registered systems that you can then convert through product migration, and in the background that uses that Liberate formula, right? And you can, you want to use Multi-Linux Manager, although some customers use RMT, because I think this kind of automates most of it for you with that SALT formula. You can integrate this into your existing CLM strategy, and I think there's just one sort of important new feature, but there's now full AppStream module support for, I think, RHEL 8 based systems, right, that was recently added, that if you are using AppStream modules of any kind, makes your life a lot easier. So are there any questions about that process so far? No? Okay. And then the migration process overview. How does this automated process work? I think, I've just covered it a little bit. I'm not sure how many of you have experience with SALT or SALT formulas. Anyone in the room have some experience with that? Okay. So in the background, this uses a SALT formula that gets attached to our system. It basically is using YAML code, as well as, I believe, some shell scripts in that that were built by our development team together to trigger this conversion procedure, right? And what this code does essentially is it will detect if this operating system is a supported version that can be converted. It will reinstall all the packages on the system, although in the formula you have an option to toggle that on and off, such that only two packages are really required. One is our logo, and then the other one is the operating system release, which does not replace the existing OS release, it kind of just has a comment on the bottom that says the system is now liberated, right? So you do not need to reinstall all the packages along with those two to be supported under Multi-Linux, but eventually you will have to do it, right? So if you do choose to do it, at the beginning, or when you onboard the servers, right, or through a product migration, I think that is kind of automatically selected as on, and you kind of toggle it off if you need to. And what that process will do is it will look at all of your current RPMs, the current versions, even if you are now hooked up to Multi-Linux channels that have upgrades. It will not apply them. It will just reinstall every existing package to the version that is now signed by SUSE LLC. So if you have running workloads on those servers, I've worked with a customer who did this to his production systems without gracefully stopping anything. He just ran it. Nothing happened. And then at the end of the process, he had downtime to reboot. And he rebooted and everything came back up. And this is why it's not really a migration. It's the exact same thing you had with our signatures, right, on the packages. And now with this support offering that if something happens to your operating system, you call us for support, right? So there are conversion logs. They are in var log. As the procedure is running, you can look in there and see what's going on. And there, I think, the yum/cs conversion log, or the DNF/CS conversion log. I guess it depends on which OS you're liberating. And there's an additional flag file, and I found this out while working with a customer, that just says the system is liberated, and it's in etc sysconfig liberated. The reason I found this with my customer is because after starting the migration, we ran into, I think it was a package interdependency failure in our yum/cs log. So then we had to restart the process from the beginning, and we couldn't do it without removing this flag file and a couple of other things, like for a rollback, so that we can start again, right? And I think I've already kind of talked about how to run the conversion. You have the two options. Already registered systems use product migration. For brand new systems, create an activation key and attach the formula to it. I think that's fairly straightforward. Yeah, so I think in the customer use cases, well, there's a couple slides here. One is our consulting project approach, and then it's my project. You want me to do both of these? I can do this. All right.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of different frameworks you could use for doing a consulting project, but a pretty common one we use is this approach. The 5 Ds, you guys have maybe heard of, but so discover, define, design, develop, and deploy. So it's just a way to kind of divide this out. Now, a lot of times our projects, like for something like, what we're talking about right now with the Liberate formula, this would usually be involved with also like deploying a SUSE Manager server, but we do have customers that already have an existing environment, and maybe they just have certain tasks that they would want to complete, maybe liberating some systems, maybe setting up other customizations or configurations. So it just kind of depends on the scenario. But usually we try to kind of outline the projects like this, where we'll go through and obviously review where we're at and see what needs to be done. List off all of the all the stuff that needs to be done, so we don't find out midway through the project that we don't have enough disk space to mirror all of our channels, right? So it's good to identify all these things early on before we get into the actual deployments and whatnot. So then you create a plan where you're usually with customers, I like to make a big spreadsheet, and we're planning out every single system we're going to be onboarding, all of the projects, like the custom CLM projects we're going to be building for it, the activation keys, the bootstrap scripts. So we make a big plan, and yeah, maybe there's something we need to prepare for or test early on in a lab if it's going to be a edge case or something like that. Then if SUSE Manager isn't already set up, we will begin deploying the actual SUSE Manager itself and setting up non-production environments where we're mirroring and building our channels and all of our everything that needs to be in place so that you can register systems. You get all those prepared and working in non-production environment. And then, of course, you need to be testing everything. So we'll test thoroughly. Usually we pick like a couple pilot systems from each system type. You kind of go through and test and make sure it all works. And hopefully it all works the first time and you're super happy. But as we all know, there's, sometimes there's things that happen like, your clients aren't connecting to the internet and things like that,
Actually, I hope that it doesn't work so that we find stuff in the testing that we need to refine.
Yeah,
because
that's
it's
true.
a very
it's good to catch
time.
stuff then.
Yeah,
Yes, better then than in production.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very good time to find issues, not in production.
Yep, and the nice thing is if you do these things this way, you're doing a lot of preparation before you're doing your real operations. So when you go to deploy it in production, you're like, wow, everything just worked and it went super great and we're all happy and we don't have to stay up late on weekends and stuff like that. So that's always nice. And again, like it can be really great if, depending on the size of the environment and maybe you want to do the same type of deployment in another similar environment. So it's great to be keeping track of everything you're doing and building it into automation so you can just quickly deploy it again or deploy it in a DR environment, that type of thing. So these are some of the things we're thinking about as we're running through a process like this. I guess we'll just go to.
Yep. And the reason we just covered our approach is because we'll just talk about two projects that we've had the experience of working on last year. And the first project was I've worked on with a customer, and that customer had 400 CentOS 7 servers. We started the project, I want to say, end of May, and they wanted everything to be converted by the June 30th deadline or end of life of CentOS 7. So we started sort of right, like we only have 4 weeks, basically, right? So the customer did not have, there are some customers that already have Multi-Linux Manager and know how to use it. It's already installed, and so that would have been easy. But we actually had to, in this project, install it, show them how to use it, create or decide if we wanted to onboard first and then convert. And I think with their director, we were discussing at first, maybe we should onboard and learn how to patch properly using, content lifecycle management and then convert. But then when I showed the process to his engineer, he's like, well, this is easy. Why don't we just do it all in one? Anyway, we got to be done by June 30th. So I said, if you're okay with that, then I'm cool, right? We did test it in a lab. We did have to refine it. And we'll tell you that there were some learnings in that it was not the migration process that was the issue, but there were some specific environmental issues that the customer had with these 400 servers that this system administrator himself inherited from a previous sysadmin, where, for example, we started the process and there was not enough space for more than one kernel. So we had to find a special command to remove all but the last kernel so that the conversion, it was in a space where he couldn't expand, he couldn't make more room there, right? So we refined our onboarding automated shell script to do a little cleanup, do a little, sort of help the process along because of these environmental issues. And we started downloading the patches. He ran out of space in var cache. He said, okay, don't worry, I can add more disk to that area. The kernel area I couldn't do much about, right? So, and then there were some issues with package interdependencies that existed, prior to us starting to convert. But as we kicked off the conversion and looked at the logs, the conversion failed because, these 3 packages were installed and 2 of them were dependent on a third, and somehow that third was not at the same version. So we just inherited these issues, right? So, but none of these issues had anything to do with the Liberate formula itself. Once we resolved those, the process just worked. And so what I helped that system administrator do is refine that process, automate all those things, find all of the issues, quickly convert all his test environments. And he was so happy with how it went that he's like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and schedule the production ones and do them on my own. Anyway, usually we as consultants only kind of help with pilot. We pilot a couple and then you roll out. because once we get to that point, it's pretty automated. So there's not much, you could call us, but there's not much for us to do at that point, right? And that's exactly what happened, and we were able to, that customer was able to meet the deadline with no issues. He didn't, like I said earlier, he didn't turn off any services. He just literally onboarded and migrated at the same time, and he had to make sure he had scheduled downtime for the reboot that is required at the end. He also did another thing in that same maintenance window, as I was saying. As part of this process, your existing versions of RPMs get replaced with versions of RPMs signed by SUSE LLC, but they do not get patched. And because there were outstanding patches after he converted, he's like, well, I'm going to reboot anyway. Let me just apply these patches. And so he chose to do all of that, and it just pretty much worked. And that was my experience with our first customer.
Yeah, and mine was pretty similar as far as it went pretty well. And honestly, a lot of that was thanks to other consultants that had already done this and figured out some of the little issues. So with this customer, basically, they had like a pretty large environment that was running all kinds of different distributions. And they wanted to, of course, manage all those systems with one platform. But they specifically had 80 systems that were running CentOS 7 that they were really concerned about. Their security team was getting kind of mad at them, so they had like a really strict deadline of like, we need to get that rolling. So that was kind of our first priority on the project, and luckily we got that part done, I think in like the first, or maybe it was like the second week, which was good. Yeah, and on top of that, they had a lot of other systems we were integrating, a lot of SLES and SLES for SAP that we were registering. And they also had a lot of systems that hadn't been updated for a long time. Like they actually, like what they were doing is for each service pack of SLES, since our service packs happen kind of more often than, like ours are separated different than some other distributions, right? So essentially every year they were just building an image, and that image would just last them for the whole year. They were never patching until they released their image for their next system. So that's not ideal, obviously. So we got them in a much better place where those SLES and SLES for SAP systems were all onboarded, upgraded to like as far as they could go for the applications. And we also implemented live patching, which there's other sessions that we'll talk about that if you're interested. But anyways, so obviously a core part of this was getting a lot of these systems under Liberate so that they could extend that support and just make sure they were covered for those vulnerabilities, especially for those end-of-life systems. And yeah, as you guys can see in there, those are like a list of some of the types of systems we added in. And again, at the end, I put the Liberate formula process worked suspiciously well. So like you're always nervous in like support or consulting when you're deploying something and you're like, oh, it just worked, like what's the catch, So the engineering team did a great job. It's a pretty simple and straightforward solution if you have everything prepared and in place. And just like Anne-Marie said, the only thing that I was worried about, like there were maybe one or two systems that had package dependency issues. They would have had them regardless if you were just patching them normally. And they had a couple issues where we had to tweak, like, make sure there's enough memory and var cache and things like that. So, but yeah, went really well. And again, kind of like I said earlier, like the thing that I really love to hear as a consultant is we kind of deployed the solution like with pilot systems, and they're like, okay, we're gonna put this in like our acceptance systems next week. And then the week after that, over the weekend, they patched their production systems. And I was a little bit nervous about that if I was going to be getting some emails or something, but Monday we have our working session, and they're like, hey, we patched all of the production systems in like 2 hours or less or whatever. They had a lot of clusters and things too, but yeah, and they were like, this usually takes us like all day, Saturday and Sunday, and if things go wrong, like they have to work really late hours. So that just like made me feel really good that I helped them, make sure they can spend more time with their families and doing, fun things, watching sports and stuff. So, so we'll kind of jump back over to our demo. And while I hook this up, Anne-Marie will field questions. So.
All right, a question, yes.
I guess I kind of want to go back to the demo.
Yeah.
You were just doing a regular migration. So
So if you select a product migration from, I think we have two demos. One will do CentOS, but he's doing the RHEL first, right? So he's doing a demo first for a system that's already registered, RHEL 8. And then you have the option now. This wasn't, when I did my project last year in June, that wasn't a thing yet, but this is new. So they've improved the procedure as well a little bit. But you can now go, you sync down your Liberty Linux repositories. You have them there. You select product migration, and it does the thing for you. Like, you don't even have to select the Liberate formula. It's even easier, right? Okay. The allow vendor change is because that is actually, yeah, that's a good question, because you're going to want the vendor change, because I think sometimes if you don't select it, it fails. I don't know the answer to that. Possibly. Yeah,
Well, and
but
the product migration isn't just for, well, is that what you're talking about? With product migration, it's not just Liberate. Or are you talking about the formula itself?
the checkbox accept vendor change.
That was for the product migration, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. He's
Right.
Right,
so
because
so
that
product
switches-
migration
yeah.
like that function works with plain SLES too. So
Y-
you might want to go
yeah.
to 15 SP4 to SP5, and for safety, maybe don't do any vendor changes, right?
yes, because you use product migration exactly. And I've seen that used for switching from one SLES service pack to another, because some of the packages came from OpenSUSE, but now you're switching them to SUSE. So yeah, and I think you're right, because it's one page for all product migrations, right? So it's basically, but you're right. I think in this case you'll always want to say yes to that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so just to show a little bit more, because I was kind of just flipping it quick to let it run, but so basically you have that option where here you could either do this on a per system basis where you add the formula to the system, but what we actually did is we made a group that we called Liberate group, and to this group we added this Liberate formula. So there's not much to configure here. It's just reinstall packages or not. They may add more options down the road. But so once you add this, the nice thing is when you create an activation key,
Yeah, you just add it to the group, right?
yeah, you just add the Liberate group, and now any systems, well, assuming you have this box checked that I forgot to check earlier, if you have that box checked, then when you run your registration, it will do the normal onboarding, but it will also run the high state and apply that formula on the go. So.
And then once that starts, it's like, yeah, it's happening. And my customers were like, so how do you know it's working? Well, let's look at var log. Do you see a yum/es migration or conversion
the
log?
same one.
That's how you know it's working. It started. But it doesn't start immediately. It starts at some point during, and we're going to show that, right? It starts at some point during the high state, because the onboarding high state is doing its regular job as well as the conversion, can't say migration, right?
Yeah, so basically it'll do the normal onboarding, which is it'll add the repos in and all the normal stuff that it does. And then once the actual migration gets triggered, if you're on a system that is a YUM-based package management, oh, I guess I should talk to the microphone still. If you're on a YUM-based system, it'll have a yum_SLES_ES_migration. If it's DNF, it'll just be the same thing. It'll just have DNF at the beginning. But this log basically shows essentially all the packages that are being reinstalled, right? So it'll just go through that process. And if you want to watch it, like again, depending on how many packages you have installed, it could be really quick. And also if you're on an SSD versus like slow storage. So with my customer, they had kind of slower disks, and their systems had quite a few things installed. So it usually took around 10 minutes for theirs. But yeah, if for whatever reason you want to follow along, you could just tail this log. I mean, we did like the first or second time, but once you're triggering this on like, 50 systems at once, you just kind of wait and see if the event, exits successfully, and you go check if it says complete at the bottom. Now, there isn't a official roll, we'll talk about the rollback, but so you do want to prepare the systems where I would take backups and make sure everything's squared away before you test and upgrade. And ideally, if something fails, you just revert back to your snapshots or your backups.
Yeah, if they're VMs, I think my customers
especially in
did take a snapshot just to be safe. Yeah.
Yep, just to be safe. And then now let's say it did fail and you want to fix one or two things and force it to run again. You can actually do that. So there's a flag that gets set. Maybe I'll...
etc sysconfig liberated. We talked about that earlier. Yeah. And that's not the only thing. I guess it depends on which part of the process it fails in. That's the question, right? But what I noticed with my customers, if they had no space on device or whatever, because they were getting cached in var cache, right? Or if they had a package dependency, it kind of fails right up at the front, right? So it'll kind of just not proceed. And so I think at that point we just went to etc sysconfig, removed liberated, and there were two packages, the logo and the release, that we then manually installed those RPMs back to the original, and then we restarted although I don't even think we needed to do that, right? We just kind of wanted to undo everything and restart the process, and just because we ran into those issues, right? But it was not very complex. You know what? I'm not sure because his question was in what instance would you not want to reinstall all packages? As far as I understand, they're the exact same package of the exact same version that you currently have that is now signed by SUSE LLC. So you have to think about it, okay? In what scenario? I don't know, right? Like, me either, yeah. So either you do it or you just do the OS release package. Do you want a cat OS release just so they could see what it looks like? Even the OS release doesn't really change a lot of the values in there. It just has some commentary on the bottom that says it's now liberated. Yeah, because there's a lot of scripts and processes that people use to look at, the product version in OS release. So we haven't touched those variables. We kind of just add something on the bottom that says, this is expanded support, right? It's just commentary. Right?
Yeah, and about that, I think we might have forgotten to mention that earlier, but SUSE has been doing this type of process and supporting RHEL-based systems for quite a while. And that support offering and process has often been called expanded support too. So if you guys have messed around with systems in the past that are using that same, that terminology, maybe that sounds a little bit more familiar. But again, like Emery was saying, the goal is to change as little as possible, but move things over so we can continue providing patches in the future. And the patches themselves are released pretty regularly. We have there's a whole engineering team that is just for managing these Liberty or expanded support systems. So when I was in support, often we'd get a request, and they might be like, "Hey, we just saw this vulnerability that was released on such and such distribution," and often it's like, "Oh yeah, we released that yesterday too. Go check." Mm-hmm. So often it already had been released, and if not, we would go ahead and let engineering know, and they very quickly depending on the situation, just like any bug, they'll make their fixes and release it. And so it's very similar to other SLES products where you could also potentially have like PTFs, like temporary fixes and things of that nature.
So there's, I guess, there's sort of the major value of this is you're a customer that, you know, has some workloads and you don't have time to invest in a year-long project to re-platform your entire stuff right now. But you also don't want to be end of life and not have patches, right? So then you just point to these repositories. But I also think I mean, I used to be a customer, right? But it's like, yeah, you don't want to leave yourself in that state forever. Eventually, you'll have to re-platform, right? Eventually, you'll want to invest in, right? You know, you don't want to stay on, I don't know, Oracle 6 forever. Although I had a customer, you know, it's like, okay, fine, we will help you, but like, it was not a small, it was 4,000 servers, but you got to have the conversation. Like at one point, you guys are going to upgrade these, right? Right? Like you can't stay on that forever. So, and you know it's going to be a long project because it's 4,000 servers with 4,000 different applications. You got to talk to all these departments, and so it could be you got to plan for that, right? Yeah. So I think this is sort of like a quick. You are covered. We got you covered. It's easy. You just do this, and your stuff will continue to run as it is for a period of time, right? But you still have to think about your roadmap, I think, right?
That's only true for the old ones, though.
For the new ones, exactly. Like for the, I guess maybe I've just been lucky to work with all of the, dinosaurs, old servers, right? Where I had to have those conversations because it's, I mean, even for some of, those things that are not on the supported list, right? There's been some scenarios where it's like, okay, we'll make this exception, but we cannot sustain that forever, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to show before I forget. So like Anne-Marie was saying earlier, when you register them and you run Liberate, it's just going to reinstall the current packages that are installed, but it won't patch them, so you may, later want to patch. Which we've done here on like this system, for example. Now, one really nice feature that we've added in SUSE Manager 5, for those that have dealt with AppStream within SUSE Multi-Linux Manager, that was traditionally kind of problematic where they did add the option in like the previous versions where you could control it under CLM on the repo level. You could, control which app streams are being assigned and that sort of thing. You still have that option, but they've added a feature to be able to control your app streams from the system level. So if we come here and we go to software, and I'm blind, where am I? App streams. So this shows like the default app streams that that are available. You can select them and whatnot, So, I only want to have these certain versions of my app, and you just select it and go from there. So pretty cool feature they added. I just wanted to mention that. But yeah, that was pretty much it. As you guys could see, it wasn't anything too crazy. So if you guys have any questions, we'll be at like the services booth, and come hit us up. We can run through more stuff or answer any questions you guys have. But thanks again, everyone, for attending and for asking your questions and stuff. So yep, have a good one.
Thank you.